So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Bruce Lee. I'm director of the Global Obesity Prevention Center at Johns Hopkins. We're a center that focuses on bringing a systems approach to obesity prevention and control, and not just within the United States, but across the world. And as part of our efforts this summer, myself and Eli Moy, whom I'm going to introduce in a second, traveled down to New Zealand, Australia and New Zealand. And while in New Zealand, we had the great opportunity to meet Dr. Heke, who's one of our speakers here. And he and Dr. Ngata are coming from a very long ways. They're from New Zealand, and Eli will introduce them in a second. And this is a real opportunity to learn from a lot of the experience and background that they bring in terms of systems approaches to not just obesity, but a wide variety of healthcare issues. So I'm going to introduce Eli, who can then present the backgrounds of our distinguished guests. Eli is a senior analyst within our GOPC, our Global Obesity Prevention Center, and she coordinates our virtual populations for obesity prevention project, and she's also a doctoral student in international health. So Eli?
Thank you, Bruce, for that introduction. Can everyone hear me okay? All right, so we are so delighted to have our guest speakers here today. Dr. Heke is a Maori health and physical activity consultant involved in a number of projects, including national health and physical activity initiatives funded by the Ministries of Health and Education. Recently, Dr. Heke was also funded by Johns Hopkins to develop global Indigenous health models based on Maori concepts of indigeneity. And Dr. Heke's work focuses on encompassing the diversity of Maori views of the environment and environmental deities when creating messages and strategies that inform national initiatives in health, physical activity, and outdoor education. Dr. Heke produced a framework called the Atua Matua Maori Health Framework that you'll hear about today. That provides an alternative to the current non-Maori system that utilizes a strength-based, culturally appropriate system. And Dr. Ngata is from the North Island of New Zealand. He's an associate professor at the School of Indigenous Graduate Studies, also PI with the National Maori Center of Research Excellence, and chairperson of the Maori Language Commission. He's an advocate for Maori and Indigenous advancement through education and productive citizenship, particularly through the Maori language. His area of scholarship is in Maori literature, particularly Moteatea, did I say that right? And art as platforms for tribal development. He has a strong working and research relationships with regional, national, and international institutions with a focus on exploring innovative solutions to help Maori reconnect with their heritage as a foundation for tribal advancement. So without further ado, thank you again so much for being here, and I'll hand it over to you guys.
Kia ora koutou. Koe nei ka mihi ake ki tēnei whare, ki tēnei wānanga, ki tēnei tauira, ki tēnei kaiako. Māue hara mai tawhiti, ko tata ki roti a koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou. Greetings to you. I was going to say this morning, it is still this morning or this afternoon. Great to be here. We've travelled a little bit to get here, and we're actually quite humbled to participate in this, to present our ideas around Indigenous ways of doing things, Indigenous ways of thinking and behaviour. As Eli has mentioned, my name is Wayne Ngata. We may have letters and accomplishments that follow our names, but my children call me Pops, and my wife makes me dry the dishes. So we are normal people hopefully helping our own people do normal things better. Tēnā koutou. I'll ask my colleague to talk.
O tēnā tātou. A koe taku mi kia koutou. Te tangata whenua tēnei, o te whenua kei warua, o koutou maungo o koutou awa, o te whenua takoto nei, a tēnā koutou. A koe nei taku mi kia koe te kai whakahaere o tēnei, o te rōpū hauora o ngā tangata, a tēnā koe, me koe hoki mo tēnā mahi, kai mua. Me koutou katoa ngā tauira o ku hoa mahi kua mai nei, a tēnā koutou. A tēnā koutou kia ora mai tātou. It's with great pleasure we come along to talk to you today. I can say that with hand on heart. I'm not just trying to make you feel better. We've been privileged to speak in a number of places throughout the States over the last 10 days. We've had a whirlwind of a tour. We've got one more meeting tomorrow, and then we're back to New Zealand on Saturday. We started in University of Minnesota. We've been to Washington University. We've been through Michigan. We've been in Boston. We were at Harvard. It's just about nowhere we haven't been. We've been to Philadelphia. We've met with the president of the American Health Association, Shariki, there. And then we've made it to you fine folks here. So we should be getting pretty good at it by now, I think. We'll see. What we have noticed is that our presentation has changed every time we've come to speak, because we get questions from different groups with different things that they want to know about. I'm not sure whether you can actually read that. We might have to hit some lights or something a bit around that. I'll give you a quick background about how we came to be here. I've got a background in outdoor education, physical education. I trained as a Maori sport and exercise psychologist to try and get more of our communities moving. And recently come across the public health. Now, one of our mutual colleagues, Boyd Swinburne, convinced me to come into this space here. And it took some work, to be honest. He said to me, you need to come and have a look at systems science. And I said, well, that sounds terrible. He goes, no, you really do need to consider some of the ideas around this, because I think they have a parallel for what you're doing in Māori society. And I said, you're still not doing much for me, Boyd. He said, well, there's a conference on soon and it's exclusive. Only the cream are being invited. I said, that sounds even worse. And he said, it's expensive. I'll give it to you for free. Still had nothing. Then he said, the caterers are fantastic. I was in on that part. So I said, I'll come and have a look at that. And what I found out really quickly was that what he was talking about is what Māori have practiced for the last 1,000 years in New Zealand is systems science. We call it something else. And when we do use this word, people think that we're swearing when we use it. But the Māori languages use WH for F sounds. Now, we have a ski field in New Zealand called whakapapa. When I mentioned that to Americans, they're like, ooh, are you sure you're not having us on? But whakapapa as a word in our society means layers upon layers of ancestors and what they've achieved, which culminates in us as the individuals that you see here today. So we begin any of our talks with the Māori language, because we have obligations to our ancestors to represent their thinking. We represent 1% of our population that make it to postgrad and into PhD study, which means we've already bucked the system to make it this far. So we have obligations to make sure that we have the vested interest of our ancestral processes to deliver today. Having said that, we're well aware that in mainstream health practices currently, the New Zealand government is using a process which supports individualised health programs. And I see that's becoming popular, or there's some promotion material I've seen in America since we've arrived about individualised programs. We're going in the other direction. I think this is why Boyd Swinburne, who's our mutual colleague, was interested in what we had to say at this conference recently. Is we believe that we need to remove humans from health, because they're the ones getting in the road of a productive outcome for Maori. And when I said this to Boyd, he looked at me like I was on another planet, or I'd been drinking at lunchtime, or wasn't quite right. But what we're suggesting here is that since our government is using a process that isn't authentic to our systems and starts with an individual, there's no opportunity for it to be successful. We point out to different groups that the level of Indigenous resilience is a result of Maori travelling all throughout the Pacific, which is one of the most violent oceans on the planet, to people a country or an island that was the last place to be peopled on the planet. So people in the Arctic Circle before they got to New Zealand. We've survived a totally different environment from what we'd come from. We survived tribal warfare. We survived introduced disease from non-Maori. We've survived colonialism, and we've survived institutionalised racism, but we're still here. Now, when it comes to talking to an Indigenous community, or Maori communities especially, all they've heard to this point is, you represent the worst statistics and you're a problem to us. If we're able to put a different set of language in front of them that celebrates their potentiality and how great they are, that gets our foot in the door. It's a starting point. And being brown-skinned and looking a little bit more like them, maybe a little more inclined to listen. So we want to celebrate Indigenous resilience. We want to look at removing deficit information and providing an authentic practice, which for Maori is about those ancestral ties to mountains, to rivers, and to the ocean, because those are the only reasons we've survived. Those places have protected us, literally and metaphorically. They've provided food for us, and we're directly related to them. So if you like, our system looks at a form of environmental science which culminates in incidental health for our people. Now that's a big concept for most people to get their heads around, because some people think we're working on behalf of Greenpeace, or are a little bit too left field for that to be relevant in contemporary society. Well, for Maori it is. When we stood up to speak, we greeted your land and your rivers first, because we think they're the oldest representation of the way you, in fact, are physiologically presented, how you act in terms of behaviours, right down to the level of what muscularity you might have, what bone structure, what skin colour, what personality traits you have been defined by the environment that's formed your genealogical line. So we're consistent with that practice. We go back to that part to figure out why. There's a chap in the back here. You can just see his knee over there. I put this up because it's always me walking and someone rides past in a race, so I thought this is unique. I'm normally the one puffing, so I thought I'd celebrate that part. Shall I talk about this one? You have a go, or you want to have a go now? Okay. Now, I encourage you to ask questions along the way if you want to. We've got a, as you can see, pretty informal approach to speaking, and we like questions along the way rather than saving them all up for the end. So if you want to jump and throw your hand up or yell out, hey, then we'll have a bit of a talk. Wayne and I will swap the mic back and forwards and discuss things as we go. Now, the process of colonisation in our country is prevalent through education, through a number of different health institutes, through most of the processes we engage with as Maori. The irony of that is that we're part colonist as well, in actuality and in practice. And what I mean by this is that I'm half Irish. My grandfather was Irish. Wayne has connections to Scottish and English, or just Scottish? All of them. As part of that practice, we thought it would be better to sleep with the enemy. Others fought that process. We didn't. We thought it was a good way to go about things, and we've been practicing, I can tell you, but we're intermarried and intermixed with a whole range of different groups that have come to our country. Now that's the physiological aspect of it, but what's happening now is that Maori are colonising other Maori through their thinking processes. So that means that colonisation is complete in our country, because we no longer need non-Maori to tell us how to think like non-Maori, because Maori are doing it to us. and I was one of those. So I've been an outdoor practitioner and worked in those places that you see there for 30 years. And for the first 23 years, I was trying to assist the development of Maori health by using non-Maori concepts. So in effect, I was colonising other Maori people on behalf of the colonists, which isn't a nice thing to know about. And as we're talking to Maori communities at the moment throughout our country, it's causing some issues because we're questioning the styles that they're using. We've been calling some of the approaches we're using a positive subversive approach. I don't know where that term came from, we just made it up. There's another word for it, I think, where you sneak in the back door. What's that called? You know what I'm talking about. Which means that we're working in a way that our communities don't know that we're talking about health. So we never talk about health when we go to communities anymore. We might talk about knowledge or about some of the information that has made them who they are. And that's our starting point. Health is a dirty word in just about every Indigenous community I can think of, because it's quickly followed up by, you have the worst cardiovascular disease, the worst level of diabetes, the worst level of infanticide, and unless we help you, you're gone. And so most Maori will close their door at that point. You don't get any more access. So not only is it rare for us to come into an institute like this, but we're looking at alternative ways of practicing Maori health intervention. And finally, that's really a process for us of asking Indigenous communities, why would you engage? Not what you will engage with. So at the moment, as you'll know, CrossFit's a big deal globally. There's a number of cycling initiatives that we're engaging with, mountain biking in particular, because we want to reach mountains, and the mountain bike is a medium for the delivery of those ideas. But not many of our people are asking the question, or have been asked, why would you want to engage with health? Now, popular thought would be, you need to, or you're going to die. That's not enough of a threat to Maori. In fact, they'll go the other way, which most of you will know about, that type of approach of saying, well, either listen up or be at risk. For Maori, and globally we're probably recognised for this, because we were the youngest colonised population on the planet, we haven't learnt to sit up and beg properly yet. Which means when our government says do this, we tell our government, go to hell. And we'll tell you what you can do. Now, some of that is self-destructive, and we admit that. But we'll continue to pursue our ability to be self-defining. That's not going to change. Our pursuit of sovereignty is innate in Māori, and unless initiatives acknowledge that part, there won't be any opportunity for change. So we have to take an approach that asks not only why, but almost doesn't approach the concept of health, which is kind of subversive and messes with their heads a little bit, but we're good at it. Oh, this is my house, so down the road from my house. We've got lots of ocean where we live. It's all over the place, so we can pop down and hop on the ocean pretty easily. Rivers everywhere. We're never more than an hour and a half, 2 hours from the coast. Anywhere in New Zealand you can get into the water. So we're pretty lucky in that respect.
We don't necessarily plan how we're going to deliver this because we practice what we are currently preaching, and when we preach what we practice, we change things sometimes. So we change the order in which we might deliver and what slides we might talk about, and even the interpretation of what we're presenting. Suffice to say that some of the stuff here that Ihi has already mentioned is about removing humans from health. That it does sound a bit radical. The outcome is that humans will gain some health benefits, but to focus on the human or the individual in particular as or as the focus, then that doesn't necessarily work for us. So what we're promoting is that we do focus on a type of system, whakapapa, genealogy. That is what has got us to this stage. When we talk about systems and the similarities between systems, we were looking at the information that Sarah gave us earlier on, that card. There's a card that has, I think, 4, 5 or 6 circles that relate to a central circle, and that's that system. We easily related to that. That's the type of system that we operate in currently. Some Maori communities may not understand that they're operating in a system. If you were to articulate that to them, you would get 2 reactions. Shut up, get lost. That's one reaction, by the way, not 2. Or, right, okay, we'll carry on, because we understand that. That system is about how a community relates in terms of its genealogy, in terms of its whakapapa, and the responsibilities and the obligations that presents each generation and going forward as well. So we're quite. We visited St. Louis, Washington University, and spoke with people there, the systems design lab, and we were quite au fait with the type of work that they were doing, but in our own way. And they were also willing to engage with us because they saw the similarities. Same here, we can see some similarities. So we're quite excited to be here and to go further with that. And he's just thrown me at this one. So when we talk about a system, we ask people, so I said this is not about humans, but rather about seeking knowledge in the environment in which you are. So we ask people to seek that knowledge, to ensure that they can find out about their own whakapapa. I'm a descendant. Who's seen Whale Rider, by the way? Who has seen the Whale Rider? Good, all 5 of you. Right. That Whale Rider is based on an ancestor of ours by the name of Paikea. Paikea, 30 generations to me, and all my community. And that community numbers, by the way, some close to maybe 200,000 people descend from Paikea. So that's a big community. Now, that type of knowledge we seek. That type of knowledge is about the sea, what's in the sea, what's on the sea, what happens in the sea, what happens in the water. And in finding out about that environment, we are able to tap into that system and utilize all those positive, beneficial things that that system has decided to pass on to us. So when we connect with that, let's say, I'm from the sea, we encourage our people, adults and children alike, to engage with the water, to swim, to surf, to sup. Who knows what sup is, by the way? Good. Oh, gee. To sail in a particular way. But not just for those purposes. The major purpose is to find out more about themselves in that. It's not about the sailing or the supping or the having a great time on the sea, no. Rather, it is to find out knowledge about your system and connect with it, or reconnect with it in many cases. Sorry?
What is supping?
Stand-up paddle. Yeah, it was not supping from a bottle. Yeah, stand-up paddling. What we encourage people to do is, in doing so, is to find those things in that environment that enable them to be active. So, I'm not sure, he might repeat this one, but if we were to talk about shuttle runs, for instance, the common, contemporary term, shuttle runs. and we have a stopwatch. Bang, bang, bang. I would rather encourage our people who live by the sea to observe the waves when they come in or when they go out. Start. When the next wave comes in, finish. Keep an eye on the water. Out, in, and that's your stopwatch, as opposed to foreign introduced devices. So we actually do that. Or to mimic organisms or fish or life forms that exist in the water. We'll come to some examples after this, but did you do it? Yeah. Kaikohe mountain biking, north of Auckland, small community, a mountain bike trail developed by that community with the help of Ihi is based on the wheke or the octopus. So it has a central point and 8 options to follow. So in seeking your own knowledge about your own community, it becomes very relevant and therefore very sustainable for the people of that community, because they can relate to that particular system, or that system is themselves, or they whakapapa, have a genealogical link to that octopus. So that is what we do. You want to go back to the other one? You know how to go back to the other one? Yep. We have PhDs, but some things we're hopeless at. And we have a process, we've suggested a process to follow that will enable us to encourage people to move, actually move physically, but not for the sake of moving. They move because they want to find something out. They move because they want to reconnect. And in doing so, you get some incidental gains in health. Some years ago, now you look at us, Ihi and I, you would have noticed that we're relatively broad. We are the best people to talk about obesity. But we don't talk about obesity. We talk about revisiting our environment. We have a practice amongst Maori of always acknowledging our mountains, our waters, our rivers. People come last. When we acknowledge our mountains, I could guarantee that if you asked people who are acknowledging their mountains whether they have been to that mountain or up that mountain or somewhere on that mountain, the vast, vast majority will scratch their heads. And so we ask people to seek that knowledge. That is part of our practice. How do we put it into practice? You go there, but not to run up a hill or find a trail and bike up that hill. You go there to look for particular knowledge that you can reconnect with, and in doing so you gain those health benefits. You want to push again? I'll do it. There's this little device here. Yeah, right. It's called a clicker. Yeah. It's magic. You want to talk about your babies? Sure. They don't look like them, eh?
Which I'm worried about, because I travel a lot. You can be sure of the mother, I'm assured. But this one's got green eyes, that one's blue eyes with blonde hair, and I often have people say to me, whose kids? And I'm still not sure. But I have noticed that 1 or 2 of my mates have got green eyes, so there's questions. I'll roll through these ones here so that we keep to our time frames. The mountain bike initiative one has been reasonably new, maybe the last 2 years. The traditional gamers one, that one's been running for the last 7 years. What happened there was Wayne's brother encouraged me to come and work in their district, and we ended up staying for 3 or 4 years. I didn't think it would be there that long, but his brother said to me, and he's a MD, a Maori, was a Maori practicing in that area at the time. He's passed on. He convinced me to stay and try and increase the physical activity output of that tribe, to deliver information to other tribes nationally, and to engage with international audiences on this. And when he suggested this 7 years ago, I thought I might be able to do the first bit. The other 2, never. But here I am. was pretty game of him to think that at the time, I thought, but here we are in Baltimore talking about these things. So his foresight was remarkable. Now, the traditional games part, I said to him, well, I know about pre-European Maori games that we could reintroduce into your community. Once we did, it went crazy. We had 500 kids turning up at a time for tournaments. It's now a national pastime, there's a national competition, there's a national organisation. Now, as we researched it more, we found out that one game in particular, Kiorahi, was taught in America in 2004 to 31,000 schools. We'd never heard of it. It was also played in Italy during World War II. We'd never heard of it. Now, what happened in 1908, 1907, there was a Suppression Act, a piece of legislation that stopped Māori practicing Māori cultural practices at all. We couldn't access it. That was never repealed, but we're here talking about it now. And we're reintroducing these ideas to Māori communities again. They haven't seen them for over 100 years. Now, that's kind of sad in a lot of ways that so many American schools got access to this. It was funded by McDonald's. I think there were 3 Indigenous games. The devil's food was part of our history there, but we were able to get engagement from our kids by saying, well, it's everywhere else. There's a lot of people playing this game. This is part of your history. This is part of the way you've developed. Because what they used to do was play it on 5-kilometre wide fields on occasion, on the side of a mountain, and it was a replacement for war. So you could kill each other during the game. We've eased it back a little bit, but they still get reasonably aggressive during the game. But it's a full contact game. It's played on a circular field, and it has 2 teams doing completely different things. Now, there is no other game that does that as far as we know, because normally it's the same task, different direction. This game's kind of unique, which I think is why McDonald's attached themselves to it. Now, the consequences of that have been widespread throughout the country. Now, it was mostly about the pursuit of knowledge of the game, but we had the incidental outcome of increasing physical activity as a consequence. And that's what we've been practicing for the last 7 years. Now, we're at the point of travelling around to talk to other locations about some of the successes we've managed to obtain. But we're also exposing our ideas to different locations so that we can get the collective mind power that's here today to comment on that, to think about that, to contribute potentially to what's happening in New Zealand. Now, we've said to Bruce and to Larry and his colleagues here that we want to see you in New Zealand. We want to exchange students. We want to have people come and have a look at what we're doing and send some of ours here and find out ways that we can move forward with some of our initiatives and share some of our ideas. Oh, you talked about the surf club a bit, didn't you? No. Surf club one at the bottom. Wayne touched on that briefly. That's been cool. I love this. I wouldn't call it an intervention or initiative. It was just something we were up to at the time. But when I came into their community, they had a surf club there. You've probably seen some of it. It's popular in Australia as well. Surf life-saving organisations that are set up to take care of people when they're out in the water. You know about those if you're coastal. Midwest people were looking at us like, no. Well, we've got a lot of coast. When I arrived there, it wasn't being used, and I asked some of them, I said, how come that surf club's not used? Because it's right on the beach, beautiful area. They said, momo, mahi pākea. I said, that's for white fellas, nothing to do with us. I said, well, no, you fellas get in the water as well, just like everybody else, so you need to know about what's going on. I said, how come your people won't engage with it? And they said, well, the number one reason is because they've got to wear those stupid little togs. You know the ones I'm talking about here. This might be inappropriate, but we call those budgie smugglers. So, oh yes, right, camera. My wife says, she says often, she'll ring, she says, how's the talk go? I said, well, nobody called me an idiot and told me to sit down, but it must be getting close. So the Surf Club initiative, what happened there was they didn't want to wear those. And we said, fair enough. So we got ourselves elected onto the board, got ourselves made the president, the treasurer, and everything else. The old board's gone, and we rewrote the charter. And now you cannot wear budgie smugglers in this club, and it's the only club in New Zealand that does that. They wear board shorts. The other part that they said is they didn't want to use those kneel boards where you kneel down and paddle on the side there. They wanted to use stand up and wanted to use wakama, or outrigger canoes. So that's what they use. So the other form is gone and they use those ones. So they've still got a couple, I think. But this is probably the most contentious part, is they've said when they work as a surf club, their primary reason for being there is to save the ocean, not people. So if you're drowning and there's glass all over the beach, they're going to take care of the glass first. And you'll have to float for a bit. And then we'll get to you. And if we don't get there in time, it's probably a good way to balance up the IQ of the country, and you know what I mean. So, no, that doesn't happen. But that's the idea, is that they're teaching their community the knowledge base about the ocean, because that's what's formed them as a people, is the ocean. So they get that background, and then they start to look at ways of getting in the water and swimming and so on, and how to save people. But it's secondary, sometimes even further out. So it's a cool process, because I think it was last year maybe, they had the highest rate of accreditation of any surf club in the whole country per head of population. Unheard of. They have over 100 kids turn up on a Saturday morning to figure out how the ocean works. So massive changes for a community that size. He says that they've got 200,000 ancestors. In their little town that they live in, I think he said the other day in public that there's 1,500 people. It's a lie. There's about 6 people and 2 dogs. And the dogs are from the country next door, I think. So when you arrive there, there's no one. But for them to get 100 kids mobilised to come in on a Saturday morning is unbelievable. So to be associated with that, it's pretty cool too. And I think that's what Boyd may have heard about and seen, and realised that what these communities are doing is exceptional. One more click, I think. These are some of the national government-run organisations that are initiating or engaging with our concepts at the moment. So our Ministry of Health have seen that they're not getting access, they're not making changes, they're not being successful, so they're using our program. The Atua Matua program that we wrote last year has 23 levels we consider before we get to an individual's health. Right through to things such as timeframes, for example. How do we know that a health initiative should last for 6 weeks? You know, is it because the gym down the road are doing their boot camp for 6 weeks? And if so, that's not enough. That's not how we work. So we've got to use a rationale that connects to their genealogy, which might be 12 weeks, which might be a rotation of the year, or it might be 12 weeks that for 12 levels of getting to our baskets of knowledge to understand where knowledge comes from. There's a whole range of other rationales we can use. Even down to the measurement of time for, if we're going to take somebody running, we don't use watches anymore. We look at things like, if I pull apart a cobweb, how long does it take before it's rebuilt by the time I get back? So we can measure 2 and 3 hour lots there. We can measure interval sprint sessions based on wave speed. And if we want a longer interval for sprints, we choose a flatter beach. We can measure in day amounts by plant life that goes white after we flip it upside down from green. And there's a measurement of 4 days. So we're using different structures to validate why, that connect back to our practices as Maori. So they're not random. They're authentic, and they're rationales that connect to us. Must be your turn, Wayne. Whew. Okay, I'll do another slide, and then he's got to work for his lunch, doesn't he? This is me down there earlier this year in February, January in Japan. It was funded by the Japanese government to go and talk to some environmental science groups there about how we use whakapapa or genealogy to describe not only different environments, but the effect they have potentially on different communities. Now in Japan, the Shinto religion was followed quite closely in the past, but isn't so much anymore. And the Japanese government's worried about that. They're worried about the rate of suicide. They're worried about the interest in Western approaches to health by Japanese. So I was invited to go along and speak to them. Now this list that you can see here is the genealogical explanation of where snow comes from a Maori perspective of a tribe in the South Island. not the north. We don't get much of it up there. Now, Tāwhiri Mātea is our atua, or representation of storms. Huka is the snowflake. Whenua huka is permanent snow. Huka papa is where it sticks to the side of a hill. Huka mania is where it goes out into a plain. Huka po is where it cracks near the end. Huka horo is where it turns into an avalanche. Waiuka is permanent ice. Kipakanui is ice. Waiparahoaka is the milky coloured water that you get at the bottom of a glacier. Hukapuri is frost. And Waimakariri is cold water. Now right here, we have dozens of potential applications in terms of health initiatives for Māori that are based around the pursuit of the knowledge of where snow comes from. And how we've done this, and continue to do this, is this model here has been used by a Māori school in the South Island as their curriculum for their outdoor winter curriculum. So they've adopted the ideas around this because they can run kayaking programs in cold water in the South Island that has relevance or has been validated through a Māori process. Now, the kayak's not important, but why we would engage with cold water is, and here's the reason. Here's the ancestral explanation for that. Or another version we've given them is that when you get to whenua huka, which is permanent snow, you have to go through year 4, year 5, year 6, year so on, up until your final year at high school, when they'll allow you to access whenua huka as not only a curriculum topic, but also as a practical experience of climbing a mountain to get to that point. So there's physical activity as an incidental outcome every time. It's almost 10:02. I saw you looking at the clock. Just kidding. So it must be time to almost wrap up. And then you've got to ask some questions. I don't know if we need to talk about it. Well,
No, because we decided that we'll use one example, which was the snow. But in terms of wrapping up, what interests us is the system approach, which resonates with how we look at whakapapa and how we use whakapapa, or that genealogical system approach. We've spent the last 4 or 5 years experimenting, exploring, investigating different ways that we can implement this approach, and we've received a range of feedback from our own people, which has been good. And so we're working at a range of levels in terms of government policy, through to on the ground, particularly with school kids. They're great. So if you work with school kids, younger they are, the better, because you bring in mum, dad, nannies, uncles, aunt, all the rest of it. And so that's your hook. And you bring in that particular whakapapa system to the practice. So it's great being here. We've got some time limits. We do want people to ask questions of us. Thank you. Tēnā koutou. Kia ora.
Kia ora tātou. Thank you very much. Yes, ma'am.
How did you develop a working relationship with the Ministry of Health and Ministry of
Oops, sorry.
It wasn't something that we sought deliberately, but through the practice of engaging. Thanks, Bruce. Okay. Engaging with Māori communities, the Ministry of Health recognised that we were making better progress than they were. And on top of that, I don't know why they expected any different outcomes from practicing the same thing. If we're not getting better, why would you continue? So not only did we recognise that, but because of the work I did around traditional games, it opened up a whole new field of research into environmental representatives and what they meant to us as Māori that's led to where we are now. So that's literally been the practice of looking at that for the last 6 or 7 years. The Ministry of Health has only come on board in the last 2 years, and they've been difficult. They're painful to work with. Any government is. But we're training them. They can sit up and beg now. Yes, ma'am.
That's kind of related to my question. I was wondering how all this is paid for.
Wayne pays for it. Yeah.
It'll be fair to say that a lot of it isn't paid for, so you do it because that's your responsibility to your whakapapa, to your genealogy there. But we also find support from those ministries. We do get support from those ministries. We get support from small providers in the Maori health sector as well, who have supported us coming here. We get support from the likes of institutions that are interested, like Johns Hopkins, and Boyd Swinburne, individuals that have influence. So it is an area where we are trying to find, that's why the systems approach may support us to get wider engagement with it and influence those that need to be influenced. Tomorrow, hopefully, but I think you might be there, we were going to go and see our ambassador at New Zealand Embassy in DC and have a cup of tea.
Yeah, in the communities where these initiatives have been implemented, what sort of outcomes have you seen?
Ihi mentioned one. I can talk with some authority on our little community. The outcomes have been huge engagement with families. And if we were to number those families, ranging from, even though there's 100 kids at weekly events and with the surf, that brings in something like 45 families from the region into that. So those families come in to support, to be involved, to actually do what their children are doing. And so we don't necessarily, we do the numbers because our national body requires numbers. But we have seen a major change in how we, gain the health benefits through the exercise. Two, about the knowledge that is gained, the traditional knowledge that is gained by engaging with it.
Earlier you talked a little bit about sort of colonization and how non-Indigenous programs are sort of further contributing to that. And I feel like for people like us at an institution like Johns Hopkins that does a lot of global work, that most of the programming is non-Indigenous, so in effect we are also part of the colonization process. So I'm wondering what kind of recommendations you would have for institutions like us to actually sort of redesign our programming to be more in line with Indigenous communities and not with these outside perspectives.
Interesting question, and one that we've fielded a couple of times along the way. There's a couple of barriers to what we do. One of them is, if I give you an overview, how do we generalise? What's the generalisability of what we're suggesting? How does it apply to non-Indigenous people that want to engage with the theory? And less common, but still we get some of this, is religious connotations that are attached to what we wrote as deities or representatives of different environments. Some groups are saying, well, there is only one God, and what you're suggesting that there's a God of the ocean, there's a God of the forest, there's a God of wherever. It's a form of science for us, environmental science. It's not a religious process where that's concerned. Now, as far as non-Indigenous institutes engaging with this, the first example I gave at the start was Maori are a mixture of non-Indigenous and Indigenous. Most of us don't want to accept that, but it's a matter of fact. On top of that, we require allies. We have to have a voice in the mainstream environment that understands what we're doing and can relate to other mainstream organisations to move it. Because we can't. This is rare for us to be here. We're tickled pink that anybody turned up today. We think it's a hoot that someone would come and listen to us. I wouldn't trust me with a pair of flip-flops, let alone with an audience like this. But here I am. So we can't do that with a lot of groups at home. The other reason we're here is because we want to affect leverage with our government through what happens here. Johns Hopkins' name carries power in our country. So that's why we need institutes outside to create leverage at home. So we need to be here. Now, as far as non-Indigenous people wanting to engage with Indigenous concepts, At home, we talk to a number of different groups and say, look, it might be Maori knowledge, but your experience of a beach, of a river, of a mountain is no less than ours. You still love those places from when you were a 6-year-old and you went to a river, swam in it all day, and you still want to go back every summer and do the same thing. We don't question that process. In New Zealand, we say, well, the knowledge you might be using about whakapapa, such as the information I put up in the last slide, that's ours. And when it comes to that, all you need to do is acknowledge, this has come from a Maori content, but I agree with it, and then you move forward. So there's still a phase or a cycle of some of our people still being angry and not wanting to share. Some that have moved on into another space of considering it. Wayne and I have been in the space for quite some time, and we're ready to go. So we're part of that initiative of pushing things out, and that's going to require allies. Now, the other interesting part here, really quickly, sorry, I'm just trying to give a really comprehensive answer. How's it going? Cool. I've got a PhD. I don't know how come. If we don't engage with organisations like this and give examples, we may miss out on an opportunity to share with other Indigenous groups globally. And I think what's been happening since we've been here is we've had the, rhetoric of some institutes saying, well, Indigenous people only represent 1% of our population. What's the point? Well, if there's 1,000 starfish that have been washed up, you throw one back, I bet you that one appreciates it. And on top of that, I think that African American people have just as much to benefit from understanding what it is we're doing as much as Indigenous people do here. Because African American people managed to survive the boat here, managed to survive slavery, managed to survive warfare, managed to survive institutionalized racism. It's no wonder they're the super athletes like we're meant to be. Because we've been through the ringer, and what you're left over with should be the best of the best. And empty chairs that are in a room like this is a line that didn't have the power to make it. So you represent the potentiality of the best that your people could provide. That's the great news. The bad news is some of us aren't fulfilling that potentiality. So you've got to pick your game up. Sweet? Must be his turn. Oh, sorry, at the back there. Yes, sir.
So, very interesting. I'm thinking, as I'm listening to you, about differences in the way we think about systems and the way you guys are talking about systems. And I have an observation, and I'd like your comment on whether you think it's correct or not. But when we think about systems and try to engage in a systems way of thinking, we tend to conceptualize systems as comprised of elements that are things. We tend to have a kind of materialist view of systems, that systems are organizations of things in the material world. And as I hear you talking, I hadn't really thought of this before, but as you were talking, it strikes me that, and this may not be fair, so I'm asking, but it seems like you're interested in systems of ideas, concepts, and cultural aspects of the world. And I'm wondering if what you think about that distinction and whether there's a barrier between thinking about systems in terms of interactions among material objects versus cultural objects.
Those examples are very cool.
So when we think about systems, the difference between the concept and we think about concepts and practices. Now there may be materialistic things within those, but if we think about systems, we think about the obligations, the roles and responsibilities of genealogy. That can operate in an educational field. It can operate in a cultural field. It can operate in a very practical field where physical activities are taking place, like in these examples here. It can operate in an economic field where there is resourcing support provided to enable those things to happen. It can operate in a policy field where rules and regulations and Charters are formed to ensure that a particular type of behaviour is monitored and takes place. It can operate in an assessment field where we assess what's taking place in a cultural way. So some of the things may be material, some of them are not necessarily so. But that's why we'd like to engage with the type of systems approaches that are being talked about here at Johns Hopkins, at Washington, in St. Louis, and other places as well. We don't see too much of a difference. It's a good learning. He's
I
gonna.
just wanted to thank you for this presentation and the sort of beautiful way that you've approached some of these problems, or looking for ways to make improvements within the community. One of the things that we struggle with often as well is finding this balance between sort of respecting the culture and the traditions of the community, and at the same time balancing that with the need to evaluate and know whether or not what we're doing is actually working and actually changing lives and actually impacting health. And I would love to hear from you guys how you've approached that.
No, you go.
Sorry, ask your question?
I'm sorry.
Ask your question again?
How you've balanced the need to work within the culture and the traditions, and at the same time measure the impact of what you're doing and whether or not it's working.
Well, one of the things you do is you find the relevant triggers of their community. What motivates them? What is their whakapapa? What will motivate them to do something? How you evaluate that, he mentioned this before, you evaluate it on that same scale. Because to take a traditional system, for instance, and motivate people to engage with that and then evaluate it on a completely different scale, I'm not sure if that would make sense. Yeah.
It's part of what we're still doing at the moment, is the simultaneous, this bloody microphone, I tell you. The idea of requiring an Indigenous assessment procedure to match the Indigenous intervention is really important. We're struggling with our government to convince them of that. They're trying to give us a non-Indigenous approach to measuring what we do. Now, there are some semi-clinical measurements that we've used in pre-European contexts of measuring urine, looking at heart rate testing, looking at psych testing prior to going into battle. So we can validate some of the extensions of that we might see in contemporary Maori society now, but we've still got some way to go on defining what that looks like. As far as our obligations to Maori communities, we have obligations that are to others. And this is one of the concepts that we talk about a lot around health, is that if we individualise health, sometimes we feel as though we've failed, sometimes it's insurmountable, sometimes it's a process that needs help around you. If we shift that obligation to thinking about other people, and certainly when we get above 2 or 3 people, we're less likely to tell them crap. If they ring up and say, oh, I can't come to the program today, they might do that to one person, but if there's 3 or 4 that we have obligations to, we're not going to do that. We're going to go. So it's part and parcel of being Maori, but a lot of our people have forgotten how to do that.
We're at the end of our hour. I wanted to thank Dr. Heke and Dr. Ngata for a very informative and inspiring talk. We want to add that we view this as an initial gateway to working with Dr. Heke and Dr. Ngata and their colleagues, because they recently were awarded a pilot studies grant from our pilot studies core, which is run by Dr. Larry Cheskin, who's in the back of the room. So this is a real opportunity to learn from each other and work together. So if any of you are interested in the project or ongoing engagement, please let us know in the Global Obesity Prevention Center. But on behalf of the GOPC and Johns Hopkins, I want to thank you again for your talk and look forward to the opportunities.
Thank you.